Picture yourself eating a raw sweet potato, not as a health experiment or a challenge video, as your only option, as the food that is available, that you have spent significant energy acquiring, and that your body needs to process to survive the next 24 hours. The sweet potato is cold, dense, and fibrous, in a way that your jaw notices almost immediately. The starches in it are locked inside cell walls that your digestive system will struggle to break down efficiently. Your body will extract perhaps 40 to 50% of the available calories from this food. The rest will pass through you largely unprocessed. You will be chewing for a long time. You will be hungry again sooner than you expected. And this is the optimistic scenario because sweet potatoes are among the better raw plant foods available to humans. Now imagine this is not one meal. This is every meal, every day, for your entire life and for the entire lives of the humans who came before you, stretching back through a period that makes all of recorded human history look like a footnote. Before fire, this was the situation. Not the dramatic cinematic version of primitive humans cowering in caves while terrifying predators circled outside. The more mundane, metabolically consequential reality of a species trying to sustain large, energetically expensive bodies and brains on a raw food diet in an environment that offered no shortcuts. What ancient humans actually ate before fire, and what that diet cost them, what it could and could not provide, and how the transition to cooked food eventually transformed everything about the human body and human society, is one of the most illuminating questions in all of human evolutionary biology, because the answer explains things about your body that you carry with you right now. Your relatively small gut, your relatively large brain, your inability to process cellulose, your preference for cooked food that runs so deep it is almost impossible to override even when you try. You are what your ancestors ate, and before fire, they ate something very different from what came after. Begin with the timeline, because context matters enormously here. The control of fire by human ancestors, the ability to start, maintain, and use fire deliberately rather than simply exploiting natural fire opportunistically, appears in the archaeological record at approximately 400,000 years ago in hearths at sites like Qasem Cave in Israel and Beach's Pit in Britain, with possible earlier evidence at sites like Wonderwork Cave in South Africa, that some researchers date to approximately 1 million years ago. The earliest members of the genus Homo habilis, appearing approximately 2.4 million years ago, were almost certainly not controlling fire. The entire span from the emergence of our genus to the reliable evidence of controlled fire use represents somewhere between 1 and 2 million years of hominin existence without cooking. What were they eating across those 1 to 2 million years? The answer is not one diet, but a range of diets varying by species, by time period, by geography, and by the season within any given year. But the dietary evidence from multiple converging lines, tooth morphology, isotopic analysis of fossil bones, gut anatomy comparisons with relatives, dental calculus analysis, and the plant and animal remains preserved at archaeological sites, paints a consistent picture of a diet substantially more varied and facing substantially more challenges than the simplified cave person narrative usually suggests. Start with plants, because plants constituted a significant portion of early hominin diet across every period and every species, and because the specific challenge of pre-fire plant food consumption reveals exactly why cooking was such a transformative technology. The plant foods available to early hominins in African savanna and woodland environments fell into several broad categories. Underground storage organs like tubers, corms, and bulbs, ripe fruits, seeds, and nuts. Above-ground vegetation like leaves, shoots, and stems, and various specific plant products like gums, resins, and pith from specific plant species. Underground storage organs deserve particular attention because they are among the most nutritionally dense plant foods in savanna and woodland environments, and because the cooking of tubers appears to have been one of the primary drivers of the cooking revolution's nutritional benefits. Plants store carbohydrates underground, in swollen roots, corms, and tubers, as a strategy for surviving drought and fire. These underground organs are protected from surface conditions, retain moisture during dry seasons, and represent concentrated caloric resources that persist year-round even when surface vegetation is unavailable. For hominins equipped with digging tools, even simple sharpened sticks, accessing these underground resources was a major dietary opportunity. The African landscape contains numerous plants with substantial underground storage organs. Various species of wild yam, the tiger nut sedge, Cyperus esculentus, various bulb species, and the remarkable hairy underground corm of Hypoxis hemerocalidea. Evidence from the analysis of plant remains at early hominin sites and, from calculus residues on fossil teeth, includes plant starches consistent with underground storage organ consumption at multiple pre-fire sites. The problem is nutritional accessibility. The starches in raw tubers are largely resistant starch, crystalline in structure, inaccessible to the amylase enzymes in human saliva and small intestine. A raw tuber provides substantially fewer usable calories than a cooked one because the cooking process gelatinizes the starch, breaking the crystalline structure and making it available for enzymatic digestion. Studies comparing caloric extraction from raw versus cooked starchy foods find that cooking increases digestibility by 30 to 50% for starchy plant foods, meaning an early hominin eating raw tubers was extracting perhaps half to two-thirds of the calories that would be available from the same food cooked. This is not a trivial difference, when the margin between adequate and inadequate caloric intake is the difference between survival and starvation. As it often was in the boom and bust food environments of the African savanna, extracting 50% more calories from the same food represents a significant survival advantage. The transition to cooked starchy plant foods was not just a culinary improvement, it was a nutritional revolution. Raw fruits presented fewer digestive challenges than tubers because fruit sugar is already in simple, bioavailable form, fructose and glucose that require no cooking to render digestible. Ripe fruits were probably among the most valuable raw foods for early hominins, providing quickly accessible energy with relatively low digestive processing costs. The problem with fruit as a dietary staple is seasonal and geographical availability. Tropical and subtropical fruit-bearing trees produce fruit in cycles that concentrate abundance in certain seasons and eliminate it in others. A diet dependent on fruit requires either extremely large home ranges to access fruit-bearing trees in different seasonal cycles or the ability to survive on alternative foods during fruit-poor seasons. Early hominin diets show isotopic signatures consistent with significant C4 plant consumption. Plants using the C4 photosynthetic pathway that characterizes savanna grasses and sedges. This was surprising when first documented because grasses and sedges seem unlikely hominin foods. Their leaves are highly fibrous, low in digestible nutrition, and require the multi-chambered stomach of a ruminant to process effectively. The resolution of this puzzle came from recognizing that hominins were not eating grass leaves, but were consuming underground and reproductive parts of C4 plants. Sedge corms, grass seeds, and other concentrated products of C4 plants that were digestible without ruminant-style fermentation. Grass seeds, the wild relatives of the grains that eventually became staple crops, were a pre-fire plant food of significant importance for early hominins in appropriate environments. Small grass seeds require processing. They cannot be eaten whole in large quantities because the hulls are indigestible and the ratio of hull to nutrition is unfavorable. But hominins with the manual dexterity to dehull seeds, possibly combined with stone tools for grinding, could access the concentrated starch and protein of grass seeds. The nutritional cost of eating raw seeds is partly in the anti-nutritional compounds many seeds contain, phytates, tannins, enzyme inhibitors, that reduce digestibility and nutrient absorption. Cooking neutralizes many of these compounds, which is why cooked grains are dramatically more nutritious than raw ones, but raw seeds in smaller quantities were a viable pre-fire food. By the way, if you want to go even deeper into the secret lives of ancient humans, I just launched a full course called The Secret Lives of Ancient Humans. 10 modules, 3+ hours of content covering everything we never talk about on YouTube. What they feared, how they communicated, what hunted them, and much more. Plus an exclusive PDF guide included. Link in the description. See you inside. Animal foods present a different picture than plant foods because the nutritional benefits of cooking animal protein are less dramatic than for starchy plants. Raw meat is digestible. Humans can extract protein and fat from raw meat with reasonable efficiency because the digestive enzymes that break down protein and fat do not require the substrate to be pre-cooked. The nutritional argument for cooking animal food is not primarily about caloric extraction, but about food safety. Cooking kills pathogens that raw meat commonly carries, and about secondary improvements in protein bioavailability that cooking provides. Early hominin access to animal foods was real, but more complicated than the popular image of ancestral hunters bringing down large game suggests. The fossil record of early Homo habilis and the associated stone tools tell a story of systematic butchery of large animal carcasses, with cut marks on the bones of wildebeest, horse, and other large ungulates at sites like Olduvai Gorge, demonstrating that early Homo was accessing large animal carcasses with stone tools. But whether early hominins were primarily hunting these large animals or primarily scavenging them, arriving at predator kills after the primary consumers had eaten their fill and exploiting the remaining carcass, has been a major interpretive debate in paleoanthropology. The pattern of cut marks and predator tooth marks on early Homo butchery sites is most consistent with secondary access. Hominins arriving at carcasses after predators had consumed the soft tissue, using stone tools to access the marrow within bones and the brain within skulls that predators could not easily access. Bone marrow and brain tissue are calorie-dense, fat-rich, and nutritionally extremely valuable. They contain essential fatty acids critical for brain development and maintenance that plant foods provide in much smaller quantities. The hominin niche in early Pleistocene scavenging ecology appears to have been specialized around accessing these highest-value, hardest-to-access components of large animal carcasses rather than hunting the animals themselves. This scavenging plus stone tool access strategy has interesting implications for the pre-fire diet. Marrow extracted from bone and brain from skull is available in a ready-to-consume form without cooking. Fat and tissue that can be immediately processed by the digestive system. The challenge is competing with other scavengers for access to carcasses before they are exhausted. Getting to the bones before spotted hyenas can crush them with their powerful jaws, and managing the pathogen risk of consuming tissue from an animal that may have been dead for some time in African heat. Insects and invertebrates were almost certainly a more significant component of the pre-fire hominin diet than they receive credit for in most popular accounts of ancestral eating. Termites, ants, beetle larvae, caterpillars, and various other insects are protein and fat-rich foods that are accessible year-round in tropical environments. Modern chimpanzees, whose dietary ecology provides the closest living model for the early hominin dietary strategy, consume insects extensively and show documented seasonal preference for termites during the swarming season that suggests insects were not occasional opportunistic snacks, but regular dietary contributors. The caloric and nutritional value of insects is surprisingly competitive with other animal foods. Termite queens are particularly fat-rich at certain life stages. Various beetle larvae common in tropical environments have fat contents comparable to many vertebrate animals. The protein quality of insect protein is high by human nutritional standards, containing the full complement of essential amino acids. And insects require no hunting strategy beyond location and collection. No weapon technology, no cooperative coordination, no complex planning. They represent a nutritional resource accessible to hominins at any technological level. Honey and bee products were almost certainly exploited by pre-fire hominins as a high-value concentrated caloric source. Modern chimpanzees access bee nests and consume honey with obvious enthusiasm when they encounter it, and the physical capability to locate and access bee nests requires nothing, beyond the climbing ability and manual dexterity that all hominins possessed. Honey is one of the most calorie-dense natural foods available in any environment, approximately 300 calories per 100 grams, and contains simple sugars immediately available for metabolic use. The challenge of honey access without fire is bee defense, and this is one of the places where the pre-fire diet's constraints were genuinely significant. Smoke from fire is a standard traditional technique for calming bees during honey harvest. The smoke appears to interfere with the alarm pheromones that coordinate defensive stinging behavior. Without smoke, bee defense during honey harvesting is an acute physical challenge that limits how much honey can be retrieved from an actively defended nest. Pre-fire hominins who wanted honey had to manage bee defense through speed, tolerance of stings, or the exploitation of abandoned or less defended nests, strategies that limited honey access relative to what smoke-assisted harvesting allows. The gut anatomy of humans relative to other great apes provides physiological evidence of the dietary transition that cooking represented. Human digestive tracts are substantially shorter relative to body size than those of chimpanzees, gorillas, or orangutans. The small intestine is shorter. The large intestine, which in other great apes houses extensive microbial fermentation that extracts energy from plant cell walls, the small intestine cannot digest, is dramatically smaller in proportion to body size in humans. This reduced large intestine means that humans are poorly equipped for the kind of fermentative processing of raw plant material that allows other great apes to subsist on diets heavy in raw leaves and stems. This gut reduction is not a problem if the diet is primarily composed of cooked foods whose starches have already been gelatinized, making them efficiently digestible in the small intestine before reaching the large intestine. It is a significant constraint on a raw food diet, because it means humans cannot extract the fermentative energy from raw plant cell walls that other great apes depend on when fruit is scarce. The human gut has essentially sacrificed the large intestine's fermentative capacity, which requires expensive gut tissue to maintain, in exchange for the metabolic economy of relying on cooked foods' improved pre-digestive preparation. This anatomical evidence suggests that the transition to cooked food preceded and drove the reduction in human gut size, that the Homo lineage's guts shrank because cooking was already doing the pre-digestive preparation work that a large fermentative colon would otherwise perform. This anatomical change may have occurred as early as Homo erectus, which appeared approximately 1.8 million years ago and shows reduced gut size indicators compared to earlier Australopithecines. If Homo erectus had already reduced its large intestine relative to earlier hominins, this would suggest that some form of food processing, possibly including early fire use even before the definitive archaeological evidence at 400,000 years ago, may have preceded the robust archaeological record of controlled fire. The brain size trajectory of the human lineage is directly connected to this dietary story through the expensive tissue hypothesis. The brain is metabolically the most expensive organ in the human body, consuming approximately 20% of total caloric intake in an adult, despite representing only approximately 2% of body weight. Maintaining a large brain requires a reliable, high-quality caloric base. The dramatic increase in brain size from Australopithecus to Homo, from approximately 400 cubic centimeters to approximately 900 in early Homo, and eventually to 1400 in modern Homo sapiens, required a dietary change that provided the metabolic basis for this expansion. The gut reduction and the brain expansion appear to be causally connected through this caloric exchange. A smaller, less expensive gut freed metabolic resources that could be redirected toward larger, more expensive brain tissue. The dietary shift that allowed gut reduction toward foods higher in digestibility, specifically higher in animal fat and protein, and starchy plant foods more efficiently processed, was also the dietary shift that provided the caloric density to fuel a larger brain. Cooking accelerated this process dramatically when it became available by improving the caloric extraction from the plant foods already in the diet and by killing pathogens in animal foods. The social dimension of pre-fire eating is underappreciated. Modern human eating is deeply social. Meals are shared events with cultural significance that extends far beyond the nutritional transaction. The social structure of pre-fire hominin eating was probably considerably less elaborate than this, though not absent. Chimpanzees show social sharing of food, particularly high-value animal foods, in ways that reflect social relationships and coalition dynamics. But the extensive cooperative food processing and sharing that cooking eventually enabled was probably not characteristic of pre-fire hominin groups, where the primary processing technology was teeth and hands and where food was largely consumed close to where it was found. The transformation that cooking brought to the social organization of eating, the camp as a social center where food was brought and prepared communally, the division of labor between foragers and processors, the evening gathering around the fire that combined food sharing with social interaction and cultural transmission, was not just a dietary change, but a social reorganization whose consequences extended through every aspect of hominin group life. Before fire, early humans ate a diet that was extraordinarily broad in the sense of including many different food categories, but nutritionally constrained in the sense that the most calorie-dense and nutrient-dense foods were the hardest to access, the most competitive to secure, and the least efficiently processed by raw digestion. They were not starving. They were maintaining populations across Africa across millions of years of this dietary strategy, which requires adequate nutrition by definition. But the margins were thin, the energetic costs of food acquisition and processing were high, and the caloric extraction from available foods was substantially less efficient than what cooking would eventually enable. The raw sweet potato at the beginning of this account is not a worst-case scenario. It is a representative sample of what a significant portion of the pre-fire hominin diet looked like: dense, fibrous, demanding, and extracting less from the investment than what came after. What came after changed everything, not just the menu, the entire species.